was born and raised in Detroit, Michigan, October 29th, 1948, to Mary and Rozelle White.
Of course, they gave you the middle name Fredrick.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
And your dad has a middle name.
Yes, which makes him the junior.
I graduated from elementary school at 12.
Okay.
Because I was double promoted and I went to summer school, and then my birthday's in October, so I started school really at 4 years old. So that's why I got out of 8th grade at 12. So I went to the High School of Commerce, which was a business school that was next door to Cass Tech. And so that school was designed primarily for females. They really didn't have a lot of males at that school. It was 2,000 girls or women, young women, and about 50 men. And so,
wow.
Yeah. And so I was in puberty. I didn't know nothing about girls at that time, but that soon went away really fast. It's just too many girls. But when I went there, I was an all-A student. And I think I lost concentration. They tore down Commerce to build the Fisher Freeway. So all of us had the opportunity to go to Cass if we wanted to. But I wanted to go back to the hood with all of my friends at Eastern High School. So that's why I ended up at Eastern High School, and where I met the kid's mother, Anita Hallams. I met her at Eastern High School. So we were both teenagers, 14, 15 years old when we met. And so wasn't interested in school. I mean, we just didn't see no interest in school. At the time, the advantage that young people don't have today, at the time, we could go into the factory and make just as much money as a lawyer or a doctor that was just starting out. The factories was paying good money. So we just didn't really care that much about school. So I really got in the factory at 17. I got in Chrysler Corporation at 17 years old because I had a phony document. I can say it now. I had a notary public fill out a document saying I was 18. I was going to turn 18 in a month anyway. But the story really quick, my best friend, Presley Yates, we grew up together right across the street from each other on Fisher. He had went to welding school, but Presley wasn't that good with books. And so he said, look, I want you to take the test for me, and I'll take the test for you when we went up to Chrysler. Ironically, Presley passed the test for me in my name, and I passed the test for him in his name. So then we had to go take the welding test. I didn't know nothing about no welding. So he passed that easily, but I couldn't pass the test. And the guy said, well, that's all right. Don't worry about it. We're not going to weld no way right now. We're going to go in the press room. He said, all you got to do is show us your ID that you're 18. So I went back. My dad had a little store. And I went back and I said, Dad, I need an affidavit saying I'm 18 years old. He said, I thought you was going to work in the store. I said, Dad, I can't work in the store. Because at the time, being really, really transparent, my mom was alcoholic. And I love her to death with all of my heart. But when Mom got hold of that gun, she would shoot it all up in the ceiling. And so at the time, your grandmother, Anita, was pregnant with your dad. And so I was just scared. To be really honest, I was scared with living and being in the store. So I just wanted to go and just get away. And so he went and filled the papers out for me to get the documents. So I went back and I ended up working at Chrysler, and I was 17 years old. So that took me up till your grandmother, when I married her, she was 16 when we got married. And I was 17 when your dad was conceived, but I was 18 when we got married. So my birthday was October 29th. We got married November 4th, 1966. So, so your dad came along January the 15th, 1967. So that was it. That was basically my teen years. And I never looked back for school. I never had a reason to go to school, so that was really it for me. And then I did Chrysler, and then we got laid off, and I ended up at the post office. I was a mailman. I did that for about 2 years. out there in the snow and the cold, carrying mail, and just drinking. I grew up in a drinking environment. Drinking was acceptable. Drugs wasn't not really that popular in Detroit yet. The hard drugs, heroin and cocaine and all that wasn't really that popular. People were smoking marijuana, and taking pills, but heroin just wasn't that popular yet. And so I say around the age of 19, maybe 20, heroin came out with, they called it penny caps. It was $1 for a cap of heroin. And so that started my heroin addiction. So that went on, how long that went on. At the time I was 19, that went on until I was 41 years old.
Wow.
I had a drug addiction. I had a drug addiction and an alcohol addiction up until I was 41. So, wow. After doing the post office, I resigned to get a job in a store. But the store paid good money, but I was still in the red light district of Detroit. Mack and McClellan, that was the red light district. The prostitutes, the drugs, the hustlers, the thieves, all of them was in that area. And I grew up in that area. And so finally, I got fired from Chrysler's, being transparent, drunk. I tried to tear up a machine because they had took my good job away from me. And the foreman was standing right there and he saw me. And so I had to go home and tell your grandmother and my kids that I didn't have a job. And I just said, maybe the factory is not for me. And so I sold life insurance. Yeah, your grandfather got a resume. So I sold life insurance until, they took my driver's license because I couldn't, back then they didn't have drunk driving. They didn't have DUIs like they have now. And so usually you could just pull over to the side of the road and go to sleep and the police wouldn't bother you. But back in the day, like now we have DUIs, which is a good thing, because if you're drunk, you shouldn't be on the highway driving. But in 1975, I went in the Air Force. How in the world did I get into the United States Air Force? Because your Uncle Donnie retired from the Air Force. So your dad and him grew up on an Air Force base with me. So I went in the Air Force, still drinking, still drugging. They sent me 200 miles from Detroit. I was stationed at a base 200 miles from Detroit. So every weekend, just about, I was going home. So, your grandmother and Adrian, they moved up there, and then we'd fall out. She'd move back to Detroit, so it was a mess. So finally, under medical circumstances, I was discharged. In 1978, I was discharged from the Air Force, came back to Detroit with my master plan. I'm gonna go to school, I'm gonna get a job, and I'm gonna make it. So my first school, I went to the University of Michigan in Dearborn. Well, let me back up. I went to Shaw College of Detroit first because that was the first school I could get in because it was late. Because I got out of service in August and I was able to get into Shaw. That was the only school that had late registration. So I got into Shaw College. I had a job as a guard, a security guard. They was building, Kettering High School was building a swimming pool. And so I was the guard of that area, on Van Dyke and the freeway. And so I used to take your dad and your uncle and your auntie with me up there, and we'd be sleeping in the little trailer. Well, I'm telling you, they had a life. And so I used to take them with me. And so finally, Shaw College, we had a fallout about some financial situations. So I ended up going to University of Michigan, Dearborn. So I did pretty good, still drinking, still drugging. So now we're looking at still about 1979. And me and your grandmother got a divorce. She had just had enough. She had enough of the drinking, enough of the drugging, enough of the promises, and so on and so forth. So I end up marrying somebody else, drunk. high, just thinking that I had my life under control, and really, it was terrible. So I finally left U of M Dearborn, and I went to Highland Park Community College.
Mm-hmm.
So Highland Park Community College, somehow, and it had to be God, I was able to graduate with associate's degree in associate's degree in general studies. So I started out in counseling. I really started out in accounting, but that alcohol and them drugs wouldn't let me add them figures up no more. So, so I had to pick another course. So I took counseling. So that's like 1983. So this marriage I was in, it was the same thing. Drugs and alcohol, it don't really matter who you marry. It don't matter who you're with. You bring that disease with you. And so 1984, 85, I start going into treatment. And so I go into treatment telling everybody, this is it. This is it. I ain't getting high no more. And so I go back to, I used to go over to your grandmother's house, and I believe Donnie was there and Adrian, and Donnie gave me some money, and I went to the store and bought me a half a pint of vodka. And I had some problems with my stomach at the time. I didn't know what it was, and I started bleeding. So Adrian called EMS, and they took me to the hospital. I mean, your dad, he was really angry. He was really angry. And so Adrian went with me. She was about 13 or 14 years old. She went with me to the hospital, and they said, we got to keep him because he's bleeding from the inside. We don't know where it is. And I had on some shorts. I mean, I weighed about 100 pounds. I mean, it was terrible. And so he came to the hospital. Your dad came to the hospital and gave me, I think I had 2 cigarettes and about 19 or 20 cents. He said, here, you left this. He said, you need to be ashamed of yourself. Your daughter is downstairs crying. And he said, I hope you know that. June of 1990, I got my little Social Security check, and I was sitting in the alley with a bunch of men drinking. And so finally I said, man, I done had enough of this. So I called my doctor. I said, look, man, and he said, why is it so different this time? He said, you know how many times you've been in this hospital? I said, man, I'm tired. I said, I'm gonna either do this time or I'm gonna take my life. So he said, I want you to be down here at 2:00. He said, bring everything you got. He said, because you're not going back to that house. I was living in a house with a bunch of men. I didn't have a house. I ain't have a car. I ain't have furniture. I ain't have nothing. And so I went to the hospital. They came to me. They said, we want you to go into long-term treatment. I said, okay. And everybody was shocked. I thought they was going to have a heart attack because they had asked me this 50 times. And every time I told them, I ain't going in I'm not going in. I ain't got no problem. I ain't that bad. I still got a car. Even though I had to start the car with a screwdriver, I still had a car. So I thought I was like better than people. But anyway, I had $10 that I had saved. So I went to the interview to get into the place. They had a cab to bring me back to the hospital. So I jumps out of the cab in the projects because my mama lived in the projects. She was still alive. And the projects was really not that far from the hospital, from Harper Hospital. And I stopped and got some drugs. And so my sister was living in my mother's house. I went around there and got $10 from her and got some more drugs. So I go back to the hospital and I'm in my room. All the nurses come in. They happy. They say, Rozelle, we so happy. Oh my God, you're going to finally do something with your life. Oh Lord have mercy. And I'm looking out the window and I'm like, God, I say, all these people is pulling for me and I done got high again. And so I go to the place the next day. I had to take a drug screen. That Tuesday, the drug screen came back dirty. So I knew they was going to throw me out. I really didn't care because I had a little income. I had a place I could go back and stay. But God intervened and didn't throw me out. They said, we're going to put you on restriction. I said, for how long? They said, what did it matter? He said, if you got somewhere to go, go. So I said, no, I'm not going to go. So next thing I know, time goes on. I got 9 months clean. They want me to go over to the big house, the main facility, which was a residential place. They were connected. The residential place and the halfway house were connected. So I didn't go through the residential place. I went through the halfway house. So they wanted me to go to the residential place and talk to the people. And so the residential place held about 300 people. So they would come to the auditorium and I'd tell my little story, blah, 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 blah. So I already didn't have no friends because people thought I was moving to, I was getting special treatment, but God was giving me the special treatment. It wasn't no man. God has seen into my soul. He said, son, you've been struggling with this for 30 years. You've been drinking since you was 8. You've been on heroin since you was 19. And he said, I'm going to spare you. And what I want you to do is tell your story. So then I go over there. All of the counselors are sitting around. I'm in the middle of the room with the director and all them. He talking about, here go the director. I hear you got a good message. Huh? He said, all the people like you, the counselors, therapists. He said, you want to be a counselor? I said, yeah. He said, it paid $14,900 a year. I was making $8,000. He said, pay $14,900. Now we talking about 1991. That was pretty decent money. And so I was living with your grandmother. And so, I was helping her out and all that. So, I had money to burn, 14 grand. So now the guy I was working for at the residential, he was upset because he was losing a good guy, because I'm not bragging, but I caught his back. I knew how to do paperwork and all that kind of stuff. So I went over there and, so now I'm being pressured to get my bachelor's degree because all I got is associates and I don't really have the license to do therapy. I had to take 2 more tests to get the license. Finally, I got the degree. They couldn't stop me. I got the degree and I came back to work. I'm looking for a party or something, man. I wore my hat to work, my little cap. I wore it to work. And I wanted to wear the gown, but they told me I couldn't wear that, but I wore the cap. I started sending out resumes. So finally, everybody's sending back. You ain't got no experience. You don't have enough education. You don't have this. You don't have that. So finally, a place in Lansing gave me an interview. I go to the interview. I get the job. So now I'm a therapist in Lansing, Michigan. Your grandmother and I, we finally reached a decision that we couldn't make it, that we was not going to get married because I asked her to marry me and she, refused for a lot of other reasons that is kind of difficult to go into. I think, my kids know about it, but she refused. And so I went to Lansing with no intentions on looking for a wife or looking for a relationship. I went there for a job. And so I was supposed to get a job with the state. But for some reason, I didn't get the job because I got a bad recommendation from somebody. So I went back to school for my master's. So I went back for my master's in 95. And I went to Central Michigan University. And so it was a satellite school right there in Lansing. So I would go to work, same thing. I've always worked and kept a job. And I mean a full-time job. I wasn't blessed to have a part-time job. I had to have a full-time job so I could pay my rent and other bills. And so I finally, 1997, I get my bachelor's degree. I had met a young lady in church who's now my wife. We got married in 1997. We've been married 24 years. I got hired with the state of Michigan in 1997. All this in 1997. Got hired with the state of Michigan as a foster care worker. From there, I went to Protective Services. I was a resource analyst. I retired in September 2010 as a foster care supervisor. And so I retired at 62 years old because my mind and body had just gave out. And I say that because working for the state, I still had another job. I was still doing therapy for Catholic Charities. So I would get off of one job, go down the street, and there was my other job. So I say all that to say, because I know you asked me one question, and I say all that to say that God has used me. And he's not through. I got 2 books that are published on my life. I've got a book on the computer now that I need a publisher, because the 2 books I got are self-published. And it's expensive. It's expensive to self-publish because there's no guarantees. In my journey, I left out some medical stuff. I've had 33 or 4 operations, mainly in knees, back, neck. But I'm really proud of this. I haven't had a drink in 31 years.
Wow.
No alcohol, and I'm an alcoholic.
Yes, good for you.
And so your father, he came to my graduation when I graduated in '97, and I got a picture of me and him. And he said that inspired him to go back. So he went back and got his degree. And so your auntie, she went back and got her degree, Adrian. And so it's something when you can inspire your children to do something, you know, when people really thought, and I don't think that they thought my life was over. I think that they just, you know, they didn't know. I had told them so many times that I was, you know, I was done, and then I go right back to doing it, you know. And so I think that I don't know when they believed that I was serious. I don't know when they believed. That would be a good question to ask them. Now, your father, when I would go to visit your grandmother, they would give me a pass. Finally, I would go over there to visit because Adrian was still living there, my daughter, and your dad was still living there. And he would take me back to the halfway house, and he would look at me as we was driving. He said, "Dad, I don't think you're gonna ever drink or do nothing again." And while he was saying that, I was looking at them beer and wine signs, and I was like, I sure wish I had me a beer. I was like, I sure, and he looking at me talking, "Dad, you ain't gonna never do it no more." And I'm like, I wish I had me a beer, because I was gonna drink. You know, I was gonna drink. I was gonna gargle and all that stuff, so couldn't nobody smell it and play that game again. But I didn't do it. So yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Well, Granddad, this has been wonderful. This interview, I knew that this interview was going to be different from the other interviews I've done so far, because this wasn't really about me asking the questions and you answering them, but I really wanted people to hear your story, and I wanted them to just be inspired and just hear, even though as crazy as it was, that you're here. And I feel like that's what makes you my hero, that when you decided that you were done and you decided to, despite the challenge of having to try to stop and be sober, that you didn't give up. You didn't give up, and you still finished your degrees. And that right there is that deserves to be celebrated. What's your favorite part about being a granddad?
Wow. I think the favorite to me is seeing what your children put into them. Seeing what they put into them, and was that a direct result of what you put into your children? Because I just seen your cousin last night on Trevor Howard.
Trevor Noah, yeah, Jazzy.
She did a wonderful job. And so comes from my mom and dad, and then did I have something to do with that? And did, you know, her other grandmother, you know, so being a granddad, you can sit back And because there's certain things you can do with grandchildren you didn't do with your children, because you make a lot of mistakes with your children. Because number one, you don't know what you're doing, because they don't have no book to show you what to do. They might have a book, but that's not how it goes. It's trial and error. But when the grandkids come along, you just about made all the mistakes. so you treat the grandkids with a little difference. And so that makes you really proud to see them ride their bike, or see them get their driver's license, or see them, do things like that. Take a trip and talk about it, and doing what you're doing. I mean, that's amazing. And then I got a grandson that's in the Air Force. I had a son that was in the Air Force. And then I had a granddaughter that was in the Air Force. Just continuation, just life.
Thank you guys so much for tuning into this episode of the Black Heroes and Sheroes Up to Date interview series. Please comment below and let us know how you felt about this episode, and please stay tuned for the next one. With that said, you guys, bye.
Bye, baby. Bye.